Good morning, or afternoon, sorry. Yeah, I just woke up. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting for August 16th, 2021 to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Mr. Hess?
Present.
Mr. Tholen? Ms. Polk?
Present.
Mr. Snipes? Mr. Seroy? Mr. Lear?
Present.
Mrs. Weber?
Present.
Ms. Peters?
Present.
Mr. Payton? Ms. Parker?
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Fairfield?
Present.
Mr. Carrico?
Present.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Present.
Mr. Swanson? Mr. Featherling? Mr. Dennell?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Long?
Present.
Mr. Kirkstra?
Present.
Mr. Hunter? Ms. Bryan?
Present.
Mr. Collins?
Present.
Ms. Hudson?
Present.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
Mr. Alexander Hildebrand? Mr. Wheeler?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you all for coming in today. As promised in the full board meeting, we got a few things to work through here today, and I'll try not to keep you all afternoon, but this should be a good meeting and something that hopefully is welcomed by you in the community. I'll first ask for any public comment. Is there any public comment here today? I didn't receive any requests, but that's okay. Second time? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, thank you. So the first thing is the approval of all the ARPA subcommittee minutes from August 2nd, 2021. Is there a motion to approve those? I'll go Mr. Hunter and Smith with a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Alrighty, the first thing to start going through is I just want to kind of reflect back on the policies that we've adopted. Because much of the work that we have done, if not all of it to this point, except for a few emergency things that we needed to get through the system, have been regarding policy, which was an extremely important first step in this process. And as we find out, one that is being recommended, and that's one of the reasons I was a little bit late coming in here today, is being recommended by other consulting agencies around the United States. Now we're finding out that what we've been doing is pretty much spot on to the path that they're recommending to everybody else, which was, I want to say 50%, trying to figure it out. And sometimes you get a little bit lucky, but, we kind of thought this through and figured we got to start with policy. And that's what they're recommending around the country now. So we'll get into that more in a minute. So the first thing was deploy 2 years of ARPA funds on initiatives that have a long-term 10 to 20 year impact. That was as practicable. Sometimes that doesn't fit in, but that's a aspirational goal. And where it's applicable, utilize special or internal funds before ARPA funds. We discussed that mainly for our internal requests, that if there is special funds there, that those are to be used first, and then we would supplant those with anything extra that's needed to get the project done, if that's something the board would choose to do. So access grant funds instead of ARPA funds when possible. That's still a focus, even though the grant writer has been elusive, to say the least. We can't find qualified grant writers, and that's just not us, it's everybody. It's pretty much the hottest in demand job working with the government right now, I think. But again, some of this, what I'll talk about today, will provide some solutions to that. Identify and support communities that were unable or ineligible to participate in the other programs that were out there, to build a consensus for regional projects, solicit public involvement, and deliver the same exceptional transparency exemplified by other Kankakee County administration processes. We run a good ship here in terms of our internal controls, as evidenced by really the award-winning audits that we do on a yearly basis. We don't get substantial audit findings because we pay attention to what we're doing. And then the additional policies that went through the last round of committee meetings were, where applicable, grantees must demonstrate access to operational funding post-ARPA, meaning no county funding. We're looking for projects, especially on the social service side, that are able to stand on their own or with little government involvement after the fact. So look, kind of like kickstart it, get it moving, look for the gaps, what's already out there, and then see if this is something that through the documentation and the analytics, we have figured that if this is working or this is not working, trim this back, push this forward type of situation. So we won't be here forever, and so we want to make sure that we're keeping that in focus. Grantees with programs that overlap in terms of geography and or scope of service / area will be encouraged to partner and coordinate. As I mentioned many times, we're seeing overlapping, competing requests that are going after the same client base, and that's something we need to work with and be well aware of, as to not really, you know, I want to say waste money, but allocate resources in competing areas. We want to solve problems, not foster competition. That's not something that we're really into. Yes, Mr. Hunter.
We were discussing that earlier. Some of the requests and proposals are redundant, and I think you used the word overlapping. How are we, as legislators and the Finance Committee, going to be able to synthesize and extrapolate and prioritize those particular social service grant requests?
Yeah, that's something I'm going to get into in a lot of detail, but I'm glad you recognize that. I want to say that the board members are, and myself and everybody included, we have areas of expertise, things we know, things we do, things we've worked at our entire lives, and then there's other things that just fall through the gap. We want to impact some things, and we know what we want to impact, but we don't know how to turn the wrenches. We don't know what the metrics are to be able to say, is this working or not? We just know that these are things or problems that we want to address. And so part of what we'll talk about in a minute is just that. I haven't seen how this board could sit here and score competing requests when we don't have the basis of knowledge as individuals to be able to say, well, this is what's important and this is what's not important. That's why we had citizen involvement and subject matter expert involvement to help us with that. This will get more focused in what I'm going to propose in just a moment. So thank you for that. Is there any other thoughts just on that? We'll get into it a lot deeper. Yes, sir.
Isn't this what the subcommittees are supposed to be working on themselves?
This is what we were going to be working on, but I saw some trepidation as I said in the communication to schedule this meeting, that we're setting ourselves up to be the grant monitor for 50 plus grantees, and that's wholly unsustainable with a whole lot of liability on the county.
Right.
So what I'm going to propose addresses that. Okay. Because anybody that's dealt with grants knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then it also addresses what Mr. Hunter was talking about as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, this is a big one. Priority will be given to locally owned businesses and employees / students, and that's for-profit and non-for-profit. The Kankakee County Board adopts a policy that supports initiatives, infrastructure improvements, and grant opportunities that address the effects of the pandemic on Kankakee County government and designed to reduce future burden upon the taxpayers and address county infrastructure needs. So those are all the things we pass as policy. And it's pretty broad. It allows us to operate within some of the requests that have been sent in. Those initial requests have helped educate us on what our community is asking for. And we need more. We need more input, and that's this process that I'm gonna suggest actually encourages that and puts a little more defined structure behind it. So that being said, we can probably get into the PowerPoint now, and PowerPoint got a little longer, as I mentioned, because Jasmine just was on a webinar today. And I put some of those slides in here because I thought it was important to see what everybody's recommending. Not everybody, the main thought leaders in this are recommending on the internal processes, everything that's developed to be able to move this stuff forward. So the first thing is this is our current process, and that's in your packet if you don't want to bend your neck to look at the screen. But so the request comes in and it goes to the board, and then there's an internal or an external request. Go ahead and click it. So really they were going to the subcommittees and then back to the finance committee and then to the full board, and then the accountability, substantiation, all the internal controls, the reporting. We were going to have to track down all of these different recipients out there. So all the liability on repayment falls on us. If our sub-grantees are not, please go back. If our sub-grantees do not pass muster, if you will, the money's misspent, that falls back on us. The other side is that we are then the ones who are the subject matter experts making determinations of the validity of all of these different requests. And we're part of that process, but we need others that are involved in those industries, in those segments, to be able to advise what we're talking about. How do you build a program to do X, Y, and Z when you haven't worked in that industry? How do you know what the metrics are if you haven't? You have to rely on those people that do that, and that will identify, as we talk about with a lot of the different social service providers, because this is where we're seeing the biggest manifestation of this problem. You know, the biggest problem that we're seeing is that how do you actually implement these programs and then measure if they're working? We have to be able to design that ourselves, and I'm not sure that we are qualified to design that. I think our heart and our brain are in the right place, but we're not in those industries. We may have worked in law enforcement, or may have worked in different areas that we have a special knowledge base. But if you should rely on those that are currently doing that every day and really know where the gaps are, like I've talked about with our probation department, they see a lot of where the gaps are in the system and would have input on where we might be able to have some real impact. And so we can, do we need to talk about this, what our current setup is? Do you see where all that liability lies on the board on repayment? Do you see where there is no process to, you know, really just to measure anything, to be able to come back and say this is working or not working? So with that, I'll move on to the next one. And Tom, I didn't know if you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the SAMHSA grant. And I kind of warned him a little bit, or if you want to introduce somebody that might be wanting to talk about the SAMHSA grant, and we would do it over at the microphone over here. So this is a current grant as an example on how things work within the county right now. And Tom will explain a little bit about it, but yeah.
Well, what I can do is just walk you through it. Obviously, the money comes down from the feds through the flow-through agency.
Can everybody hear?
Can you hear me?
No.
No?
Could you pull it up a little bit? Sorry.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
The money comes through the flow-through agency to us, obviously. And then what we're doing is similar to this. Once it comes to probation, we're breaking it down to all the different areas that we're working with, from Riverside, Helen Wheeler, I think, what do we got, 8 to 10 agencies that we work with, that we have agreements with, okay? But we're the flow-through for that, okay? So does that make sense?
Does everybody get that? The feds released the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. They send that out. Well, we responded as a county and said we wanted, it's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. It was like, what, 2.3 million?
Yes.
Okay, when we initially got that. It was a good grant, drug court, that kind of stuff. Well, we applied, but the management of it falls under probation.
Correct.
And our internal controls, our finance department. Okay, so this is just one grant.
And the grant application itself, we put together the program and then find the agencies that obviously can work with us, build that program. We bring them in.
Right.
But we're the ones doing the application.
Right. So they do the app, they see the problem, and they write the grant towards what the problem is, and then pull the continuum of all these social service agencies together to execute it. And the first part, program and participant evaluation, there's the metrics. Because they have to know, the feds want to know, is this working? Well, I think this board wants to know, is it working? Is this something we would fund when this is done?
And this is what and it flows back up. And so we had to submit quarterly data reports, quarterly financial reports to make sure the goals are being met. And so we gather that information. We work with the agencies that we have contracted with or have agreements with, and that flows back up the same way.
Right. And whatever the situation is, it's a drawdown, it's a spending, I think yours are all drawdown dollars, I believe. So ours may be similar, they may be things that we fund in advance. However this works going down the road, there's more work to do on that part. But this model is kind of where I see a hybrid of this and what we were doing before, is kind of shifting to the next phase. So does anyone have questions for Tom to start with about how this works?
And another thing I'd like to add too, we're part of another grant outside the SAMHSA grant, that we're one of like 5 agencies that make application for the money. So in situations where we have agencies wanting funding for maybe the same type of thing, we work with the Sheriff's Department, Public Defender's, our State's Attorney's Office, Casey Casa, and we all submit one grant application. So we designed that program, so we each got our part, and it goes back up the same way as this. But the good thing is now 6 grant requests are 1 grant request. Because we work with those other agencies, we each do our part, it's submitted as one app, and then it goes back in.
So, and again, these are current federal opportunities. What we're looking at are, and as I talked to Tom and others, what's kind of the gaps? Sometimes it's transportation. They can't get to the workforce training, or they can't get here and there, and you know, they can't get all the way to KCC. They, you know, I mean, there's issues with, you know, before people are released from jail, they're not able to take the medications to get them off of opioids because they don't have a doctor when they get out. So they can't, you know, by the doctor's oath, they can't start them on the meds if they can't continue when they get out. So maybe we would look at, what does that continuum look like? Does it involve, is that a gap? And I think you would probably say it is a gap.
And the grant we're talking about, the 8 to 10 agencies we work with, that's what that is. That's the gap. That's where we went out and filled the gaps of different, you know, what we needed. That's exactly what it is. So,
and maybe there's a workforce component to that we need to put in, because folks may not have the skills for the open jobs, or they're getting trained while they're still at the jail for the open jobs we have. We can talk about all of this stuff. That's the policy you will continue to set. What do we want to do as far as the social service side of these things? Things we typically don't get involved in. There's really only one county that does in Illinois, that's Cook. They're home rule, and so they run their own hospitals and they do their own stuff, you know. We try to do as much as we can with the limited funding that we have, and some of it's pretty effective, especially in the state's attorney's office on the diversion programs. But so the problem that I saw coming was just that, the liability and the amount of grants, and people are gonna have to chase down for quarterly reporting, and then we're responsible for their internal controls. So is there any more questions for Tom? Because we'll move on to the next one. I just want to make sure we have
just
the
real quick,
basics.
I think the flow going back up is just as important as the quarterly reports, financial.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's just as important as what you were saying, is that, you know, the structure stays the same structure, just goes back up.
Yep.
So,
Mr. Hunter?
You had talked about this earlier before today, Chairman. Those 8 to 10 agencies which the money flows through, Tom, might they be able to utilize a grant writer to enhance their possibilities of other funds other than the 21.4 that we had talked about before?
Absolutely. What I'm going to suggest addresses that as well. We can't write those grants internally. We just don't have the people, the staff to do it, and we can't find someone from the outside to do it. So what I'm going to talk about in a second will address that.
You know, but the problem with that, you know, and that's something I would recommend, but the problem with that, you know, we have 21.4, you know, some of that money's been spent already and obligated, but, you know, those 8 to 10 agencies that flow through his agency, his office, they're not guaranteed getting money. So that's the problem too. And we may want to propose that, but a bird in the hand is trying to get money out of that 21.4 that we got, or whatever the amount is.
Right.
So that's an issue too.
Can be both, right?
Right.
And should be. We have to try, because they would just make our money go further. And if we partner with other municipalities that have the same issues that we're talking about, well, then we might just be able to get some, they say, do some real damage, you know, down the road, and tackling some of these major problems that are putting a burden on both taxpayers and people's lives, mainly in the, you know, for the county public safety system in the city of Kankakee. I see a lot of partnership opportunities, whether we go down that road or not. I'm not gonna stop trying for that. So if we can, let's move on to the next one. If somebody, thanks, Tom, I appreciate that. So the new process, it may seem more convoluted when I put it on the board, but it's actually much more streamlined on the reporting side where all the liability is. And it's also a lot more streamlined on the how we handle all of these non-for-profit and business requests that are starting to come in. So again, we have the external request, I believe is the first one. Those are businesses, non-for-profits, and non-covered governmental units, kind of like fire protection districts and, those folks, park districts who didn't get any type of previous help from the federal government. So what I'll be proposing, and the amount is what finance will take up, but individual capped funds, so we can budget. One other problem I saw is how are we going to know how much we spent if we can keep getting these requests without a capped fund? So we can say we want X amount of dollars here for businesses and not-for-profits, and we want X amount of dollars here for the non-covered governmental units like fire protection and park districts. Finance can determine that amount and send that to the board for full approval. But it allows us to be able to budget over the long haul. We have to do that because we can't come to the end of year two and a half, if you will, and say, oh, we're out of money and we had 16 other things that we were going to do because we keep getting requests in. That can't be open-ended. That's a suggestion to the board that I think we can reestablish them if we have extra money, but once it's gone, you can't get it back. So I would suggest that we tackle that in the finance. That's a smaller part of this, but it is important to mention now. Any questions from anybody on that?
One question, and we were discussing this back here at the little group back here. You guys may recall that some of the money's been obligated already, right? And everybody knows that, right? Wes made a presentation last week, and with the chairman's intellect, he said that would qualify for some of the funds we're receiving. Then we can use the money that he was going to spend on the air handlers for something else. You may recall, guys, that we committed ourselves to the voting machines, and last meeting we did the squad cars, right?
Yes,
Yep.
squads. Yep.
And we're all already have committed, although we don't have the numbers yet, on the Pembroke project, right? Everybody with me? Now, my concern, and I'll shut up after this, I don't think we have received, and you guys, maybe somebody's received the information I haven't yet. Have somebody indicated to me, one of the department heads, we need to take care of home first. Prioritizing the administration's requests. We need to prioritize what we need internally for the county. Vital versus wishful. And another, my colleague says needs versus wishes. So when do you think, Andy, we'll get a priority list of things that the county direly needs? And I use the word underscore direly needs.
Well, one department's dire is another's wish. So I hate to say it like that, but it's true. That'll be our decision when we do it as a group. I've got it mostly done today. I started working on it this morning, was a list of all of the approved requests that have come through the subcommittees. One that goes towards lost revenue, the other one that goes towards the ARPA COVID money. There's a COVID reason for. What we have to do as far as getting bids on certain things, what type of documentation we need from each one. And I've done that all the way through the business requests we've got in the non-for-profit. So my goal is at the next finance committee meeting on next Wednesday, which is going to be excessively long, we'll call these people in that we can maybe, if there's 20, then we may get 10 people in.
So
we're going to start going through then, and the ones that we say that we may want to do, but that are big ticket items, my suggestion would be is we put it on a future projects list that we rank. But we approve things, we send it out that have to be taken care of, or their RFQs or their bids, like vehicles and stuff like that. But then we also put other things that, I'm not gonna get specific, but things that have been requested that we're like, yeah, if we have extra money down at the end, that's a nice to have.
So the ink,
just what you're saying.
The ink is still wet on your list then?
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
it's I just was doing that, and then I had to change directions once we got this other PowerPoint that I'll show you in a minute that helps kind of
Thank you.
stamp this a little bit. So again, the external, it goes the finance and then to the full board, so everybody still gets the opportunity to support, vote for, talk about, whatever, all of these different things after it goes to the finance committee, so there's nobody's left out of the process. Those are external requests. The internal ones stay the same because we've got all the processes in place. We have the internal documentation. This is where, yes, internal controls, substantiation, and so I think you can hit the button on the next one. So this is where is the blending of the two. We are the grantor. We become the feds, like on the SAMHSA grant, because we kind of have to be. We have to be able to document everything and determine what success means in these efforts, and then report back to the public what worked and what didn't. Because you don't bat 1,000 in this effort. You know, there's going to be things that we're going to try that may work, may not work, but we're going to have the experts in the room to help us make those decisions, if you will, based on where their gaps are and what this board wants to accomplish. So we issue a no-fo or a series of no-fos. The next thing is really happening at the same time and would happen actually before then. I'm asking the board to put out an RFQ for a management and a program design partner, someone who writes grants, does the analytics, has experience in these different areas that we're talking about, whether it's substance abuse, workforce, mental health, all of these social programs. I'm not talking about the internal stuff. I'm talking about the social program stuff that we all think will help drive down costs for taxpayers and make people's lives better in Kankakee County. We all talk about it, and we have different areas that we are passionate about, but how does this all connect together? How do we transition people from one to the other? Because frankly, there are no silos. They are connected. At one point, I think I told the group that, you know, when the mental health organization that I used to be chairman of, when those folks didn't see their doctor, well, they would still get to see the doctor, but instead of off-site at a clinic, they were seeing them in jail because they'd self-medicate, offend, and they were still getting to see the doctor, but it was much more expensive for us. And so it's those types of things that we can focus on in a community, but we don't have the expertise here to be managing all these different programs, nor do we have the internal staff to chase down all of these different granting organizations. So the RFQ would find somebody who is in the industries that we're talking about, has the experience, has the analytics, can write grants, and they're funded from the grants and the admin fees that come from those. So it's not like we're out spending a bunch of money on someone else to do our business. It tends to work together like that. You get administrative fees for managing grants. So we can't use any of the federal money for local match. So there's ways that you can do that to make it equitable for our partner to help people, because they've still got a non-for-profit to run as well. These aren't for-profit companies we're looking to partner with. So, Mr. Lear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I've heard so far, I think is definitely an improvement. I, however, do have one caution that I think we need to focus on a little bit, and that is, in this management and program design partner, we need to be careful that the partner is able to move things along smoothly. I've read reports that when it comes to the issue of renters and landlords, there's a significant amount of federal money available, and yet the money is not being dispersed. And it appears that the feds sent the money to the states hired partners to distribute it, and the partners created a process that was so complicated, neither the landlords nor the renters are getting their fair money. So one thing that I would hope we be sensitive to is making sure that whatever processes are created don't stymie distribution of needed money.
Yeah, in a RFQ and an associated agreement, if whoever is the qualified partner, that's all part of what we hold them to, including that if money is misspent by the sub-grantees, that they are accountable to pay us back, not the sub-grantees. You know, we could sit there and say that everybody has to be GATA certified or compliant, have signed up for, you know, all the different certifications they need to in order to receive money, but then we're chasing them. So to your point, the contracts that we are going to be engaged in will assure that. And we'll still have to manage our vendor. We're not absent of that responsibility. So, point taken though. Was there any other thoughts about that? And I just so you know, all of these recipients, our PARP program design and management partner would be chasing everybody down on a quarterly basis and providing us one stream of documentation that we say the format that it needs to come in. We have everything buttoned up. You know, our forms are collecting the data as they are coming in for all of our internal requesters or external requesters, as the case may be. So it seems like we're kind of tightening it up and accounting for the next phase, which is really deciding, based on all of our different policies we've come up and the types of requests we're seeing, what do we want to do as a board in terms of these social programs, if you will, the things that we're trying to address within that are a big drag on the local economy, so, and people's lives. Now, there's other stuff out there for the businesses and non-for-profits and other things in the capped funds. We can determine what all that is at some point. So that was the major shift there, and I want to make sure this is clear, because if we remove the liability from us, it's our finance department and all of our departments just could not handle chasing down 30, 40, 50 grantees. It's a recipe for disaster, because first of all, we can't hire people. We do full page ads and we can't hire anybody, let alone someone who knows they're only going to be here for 2.5 years. So if you have another opportunity, you're not going to come here because you know that the job is finite. So I don't see us being able to staff this up for 2 or 3 years. Plus we're using the ARPA money for staff instead of what we want to accomplish. So any more on that? Any comments, any thoughts? This is crazy, Andy, or you like the way this is going? I mean, okay. I may hear the crazy in a minute. So this is what, and Adam, Jasmine, do you want to run through this? You want to get on the mic? Okay. I wasn't on this webinar, but she sent it over to me a few minutes ago, literally about maybe 15 minutes before the meeting.
The other one.
This will kind of give credence to what we're talking about here, that others are saying you need to do it this way. Yeah. You want to come up here? Come on up. There you go. We'll put you on the spot.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to be clear that the reason why I sent this PowerPoint to Andy today, and I will forward it to the board members later on this afternoon, that I want you guys to know that we are on the right track. So this is the webinar that I was on this afternoon. It was put on by Civic Plus and other management partners. So these management partners, they have worked with grants, they've worked with federal programs, but the partners who went through this PowerPoint today, they've had more than 25 years of experience in grant writing and things like that. So really, just to start off, they talked about the strategy and the needs, which we have already went through with the subcommittee meetings and all of that, but what they really focus on today is the process. So one of the main questions they asked is, what are we gonna do with the management funds? Who's gonna monitor it, and how are we gonna report it? So this is kind of going through that. I won't go through each line, but I want you guys to see that this is what the experts are proposing, and this is what we are already doing with the county. So next slide. The purpose is to evaluate and guide overall planning. Andy kind of went through all of this. But one of the key takeaways today was they highlighted a management partner. That is what Andy just proposed today. So I want you guys to know that we are on the right track, and this management partner, they said, has to be really fiscally responsible, really accountable, really transparent. That's what we're all focused on here today, but I am also in conversations for a new website as well. Andy, you didn't mention that yet, but we did we talk about that at the previous meeting?
I don't think so, but it'll be at finance this month.
Okay.
You mentioned that before.
I did?
Yeah,
Okay.
before, not today, but
Because it's critical infrastructure, because we're required to have one by law.
Okay. Yeah, so the new website will have all of this as well that we will all be managing, especially Kelly and myself, as far as reporting and mostly myself, but reporting and how these things are, you know, experienced, and so people know kind of where they're seeing this money is going. So Kelly and I really work together on a lot of this communication stuff, but we're gonna have something similar to a list that Andy is working on so people can see where the money is going, how it's being allocated, so there is no, you know, it's transparent there. So what they talked about today as far as a management partner is who in your community or stakeholders can you identify to be, one, fiscally responsible, and someone who's going to be, like Mr. Lear said, someone who's going to be easy to work with. That would be up to the board to decide, but they talked about a management partner kind of helping to manage these funds. Next slide. So the steering committee approach, that was what our subcommittees were doing. All of the subcommittees, when we were meeting and all of that, what we were proposing to the public, all of those policies that you guys have already approved, there's 9 of them. For the public in the back, those are on our website, www.k3county.net. And if you go under county news, there's a new landing page called KCR3 Kankakee County Funding. It's probably not what it's called, but that's what it's called. So it's all under there. So we have our documents on there, our policies, the launch report that went out in July. The funding requests are on there as well. So this is the proposal that they talked about today. How will the funds be administered and monitored? What process will be used to communicate, capture data, so-and-so, all of that. All of that we are already doing. But the last one, what written policies and procedures are in place? They talked about this a lot because a lot of the other municipalities, counties, there are about 80 others on the call, maybe more, but they had a lot of questions about what policies do we need to be approving right now. Well, you already did that in your last meeting and the meeting before that. So this is just to show that this is what the experts are proposing and you guys are way ahead of the game, so. Heather's side. Next slide. Thank you, Kelly. So this is just an overview of kind of what they are proposing for the design and how the structure will look. Very similar to what we've discussed already. We talked a lot about what the uses are allowed, what the eligible expenses are, what's not allowed. Again, all of this information is on our website as well because we've been getting some questions on what they can and cannot spend the money on. So that is also on our webpage at www.k3county.net. You'll find information directly from the U.S. Department of the Treasury on what is and is not allowed for these funds. But this is just talking about the framework. So a lot of this, again, that we are talking about today has already been done. So a lot of municipalities, counties, they were asking questions about, you know, what policies can we establish? What can we do to help businesses? That was a huge question. A lot of people asked about our business owners. How do we approve one business owner over the other? It was just a lot of questions like that, but this is the gist.
Is there any questions just about this part, about the webinar and anything on this? This came out of left field today, and it couldn't have been a better time, you know, because it was, we all wonder, you know, this is all new. Nobody's had to do this stuff before, and we're trying to create it as we go. Go with Mr. Snipes first, and then Mr. Fairfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess what safeguards do we have in place to not duplicate, but yet at the same time realizing that there are other entities that like the cities and the villages that got their own monies. So there may be services that are parallel, but we want to make sure that if they got it from this one, they're not double dipping, and then we don't have to worry about them tripping. The other thing is that because I've sat on this board and there was some funds given, we had like a loan fund. And then, and just the cost of doing business, there is a projected loss at some point, albeit with what you're about to have in place, may be small, but the potential is that there is, meaning that the person got it, even if you went at them, you won't be able to get it back. So have we taken all of that into consideration?
Well, these are grants, not loans. So when people, and this, I was gonna bring it up at finance, but one of the ideas for the capped fund, specifically towards the double dip aspect, and it did kind of touch on the second thing, I'm getting requests from within cities, and my thought is that maybe we create a grant opportunity within those capped funds that says, I'll just put a number out there, say, and this is a low number, I'm not saying this is the number, but the county will contribute up to $5,000 for a business, or let's say 10,000, to a business that experienced revenue loss from 2019 to 2020, whatever. We can document that. But if it's in a municipality, then that's up to $10,000, but it must be matched by the municipality. That's because then we got a partner in that municipality, and there shouldn't be forcing it all onto the county to take care of that. I think it's fair. So if somebody wants 10,000, it'd be 5 from the county and 5 from the municipality that they're in. If it's rural, then it's just whatever our maximum is. And I don't know what that amount is yet. That's for the finance committee to talk about, but I hope you appreciate how that would get everybody kind of, everything's on the table then, you know, as far as who's out there and who's applied and all of that. And I'm sure the feds are gonna have a list like they have for the other PPP stuff. Spend some time in that if you want to have some fun one day. Take a look at who got money and for what.
Got to certify too, right?
Yeah, GATA. Well, and that's what our sub-grantees will have to be, or GATA compliant, however they determine best protects our interests.
Yeah, with that being well taken, but I understood, even though we know that they're grants, we were saying, or I believe I heard it said, that if the individuals did not comply, they would have to pay back. We're not going to be policing that. The Fed's going to be doing that?
No, that's the person we're going to put out the RFQ for. That intermediary that's going to work and write grants for us and do all of that stuff. They're our contracted partner, if you will, to chase everybody down and to make sure that they're doing things the way that they should be doing them on a quarterly basis.
And if they're not, and I'm just saying for the small percentage that may not, and they don't have that way to pay it back, we consider that is just going to be a past practice or a learning experience.
No, our partner will be bound to pay us back. Now, what the relationship is between our partner and the sub-grantees, that's up to them to determine what that relationship is. We've removed our liability from that situation, and then we have one person that if the feds say this money was misspent, we know where to go. Yeah. That's a big part of this, to be honest. Because guess what we have to repay it with? The taxpayers, the local taxpayers' money. Right. And that's not gonna be something that'll sit well with really anybody.
Right.
So we have to have checks and balances in this, and the only way to do that when we don't have the staff to do it within county government is to do what I'm proposing. And thank goodness it's been validated by others, you know, so. We're special, Mom said, right? Yeah. No, I hope this resonates with you. I'm trying to make it smoother and easier and with less liability. So any other questions about this, any misgivings? We're still going to be working with our locals. If there is not a local that provides the service, then we will have to look outside of the area. That's just the way that it works. You try to buy local, it's an awareness thing. We want to help local, we want to help local students. Frankly, I don't see us spending money on anybody that's not from within this county. But Mr. Kinzinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question of ignorance. Request for, who is Q?
I'm sorry?
Who is Q? Request for Q is.
Oh, qualifications.
Qualifications, thank you.
Yeah, we don't want them to quote. We want to know our partner knows what they're doing.
Gotcha.
And has the track record, hasn't had to pay back grants, knows what analytics are, they've worked in these fields we're talking about, all this stuff. So, yes, sir. I'm sorry, I didn't come back to you.
Okay. So how do we maintain and control and oversight of the management and project design partner?
That partner will report to the board. Okay. So they'll be like connected to the finance committee. So, and actually they'll be connected to the executive committee too when we start developing these, you know, what we want to do as a policy. Because, you know, if when I say NOFO, the notice of funding opportunity, we're not going to be saying we want a program that's going to do X, Y, and Z with these measurables. We as a board are probably going to be saying we need to fill the gaps and try to address joblessness within Kankakee County, you know, workforce training, recidivism, mental health, and the connections that are between them all. Well, that involves like 7 different non-for-profits. you know, and getting everybody pointed in the same direction, I think, is how we kind of use this money in its strongest, most highest, best use for the social programs. There's all the other stuff is internal. We don't need our program manager for that. Does that make sense? We handle everything else internally. That's businesses, cap funds, all that stuff. But for the social program stuff, that's way out of our area.
So the finance committee is still gonna have control over the money going out?
Yes,
Not the-
finance and then full board.
Okay.
Yeah, they won't do anything that we don't authorize them to do. I'm gonna try to figure out where the hum's coming from here.
That's my heart. And then my...
Sorry. You don't know what feedback is. Yeah, I get my keyboard up here. Actually, he plays it a lot better than I do. Mr. Snipes does. He makes that thing sing. So, with that, are we okay to move this to finance? And if so, I put it on the agenda as such. Is there a motion to move this whole thing and start this new system? Mr. Eckhoff, Ms. Polk with a second. I did also want to mention that we've got a lot coming in finance. It's a big list of what we've got to work through. So to Mr. Hunter's point, I'm trying to organize it so everybody can kind of work through that. We absolutely, completely, totally appreciate all the community partners that got us to this point, and we still need you. You see how that's going to become essential when we start creating what these NOFOs look like, because you're telling us where the gaps are. You know, you're saying, well, you know, we lose people here, we lose people there. This would be more effective if we did X, Y, and Z. And once we start to see where those overlap, then we can go to maybe some of our other municipal partners and say, hey, this is about 80% of your problem too. You want to jump in this with us? Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but at least they'll know what we're doing by this process, and it's all very open and transparent. So with that, it's just really a voice vote, because we're not spending money at this point, I don't think, anywhere in this. I guess all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed, same sign. And I can't short sell that enough. The work that like Workforce and KCC and all the other subject matter experts has done have got us to this point. And those who have submitted requests, they made us realize confirm what we knew, and really kind of showed us what we didn't know, and that kind of pushed it into a higher level type organizational aspect. We don't want to foster competition. We want to foster success. And I saw a lot of competition come in our direction. So, the last thing I'll mention is, and this isn't like, this is a list I was given on the 11th. I want to make sure that everybody knows this. If you're from a municipality that I'm going to mention, as of the 11th, they hadn't applied for their ARPA funds yet. And so I think that it might be a good idea that we get out Aroma Park, Bourbonnais, Irwin, Limestone, Moments, Salmons Point, Sun River Terrace, Simmerton, and Union Hill. They all hadn't applied for the money we're talking about right now. So if you're in that district, you know people, give them a shout. So they've got to apply. You know, you can't win if you don't play, type thing. Basically, they go on the government's website and you say, send me the money, and they do. So there would, yeah, U.S. Department of Treasury. Yeah, actually, I think they work with the state. I apologize. We're Treasury direct. They go through the state. So I don't know everything about their process. I know it's not exactly like ours, but all they have to do is say they want it. And so we hope they do, because frankly, I think there's a lot of those entities we could do things with. And it's not a little bit of money. So, anybody else? Thoughts? Changes? Oh, and one thing I'll mention, we won't do the all-day Monday meetings. That is all shifted to finance. I just want to make sure we do that. But we still want people to come. We will email them when their ask is up in front of the committee, but know that most of the social service stuff is going to be, we're going to send out the RFQ as soon as we get it together, and finance or full board approve, and or the full board approves it. We got to get that partner in so we can start building that program. So we've got a nice stack of stuff already. And when we start getting to that point, we'll start working through that with the people that have already submitted and figure out exactly where the overlaps are and how we try to take care of everybody as much as possible. So, Mr. Snipes?
I know it's a wish list, but since we're dreaming, let me dream this way. I know that Bradley purchased the Carson's men's department. I know that they purchased J.C. Penney's for $577,000. The anchor stores look like they, when I asked, they bought their own buildings, so that's why they're selling them individually. So I'm not proposing that we rent from Bradley, but there's a Sears and there's a Carson's. The women's store that sit right there in the front and to the side, and that's a lot of space. And I know we didn't have the wherewith to build a courthouse or whatever, but just on a wish list, if there was a way that we could purchase one of those two by talking to or seeing if it's feasible to kind of put our less, I don't want to say less threatening, but our less, the courts like traffic court, maybe a family court, and have a satellite out at the mall, especially traffic. I'm thinking that that could be something that's feasible, because that would be, it would alleviate, because we're going to eventually have to look at a courtroom because we don't have enough courtrooms for the individuals. And if we can put at least two of those out there, or even just the traffic court, I think that would be a great opportunity at a lesser cost, but being able to have a satellite by purchasing one of those buildings that's already existing before they all bought up. And we also stated we need space or to do other things or whatever. So just putting that out there is just a wish. It's not just a thought, I'm sure.
Well, at finance, your wish may be granted. We're not building a new courthouse, but there has been discussions happening about a couple of courtrooms, but they can't be across town. They have to be in proximity to the courthouse because of staffing. We can't have two separate crews all the way on the other side of town. And that came out through our multiple courthouse studies. I want the public to be clear, we're not building a courthouse. We haven't even decided what we're gonna do. But the courts have agreed that, and we saw the space needs analysis, we have some very serious space needs in that courthouse, which equals COVID, which means instead of, and we still have ADA problems there,
Right.
and especially in the circuit clerk's office. So we have to address that. It's better to do it now with these funds than our local taxpayers who will have to pay for it at some point. So that was one of the suggestions, and the courts finally said, yeah, let's start looking at that. So if you're starting to see some of these infrastructure things that we're talking about, that will probably lead towards an RFQ for someone who's a design build firm to, I mean, we've talked about 6 or 7 of those already, different things that need to be constructed. And they're all not huge amounts of money. It's not the $190 million courthouse that they tried to do before. This is something that's economical, that solves the needs for our county, and we're hopefully set up for the next 30 to 50 years as far as space needs goes. A little bit can go a long way. So yes, we're talking about that, and we will get into it more and more as this goes to the next phase.
Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that I haven't heard anybody address is, and I was reading about census reports here. I believe I read that every county in Illinois lost population this year in the census report.
No, I don't think everyone did, but a lot of them did. Yeah.
Well, I know Kankakee did.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that, for instance, in the last meeting, we tied infrastructure with air duct systems into, we found a way to make that so it would be covered under these ARPA funds with putting in UV light and things like that. Have we considered, because I would assume that, and I know for a fact that people have left not only this county but this state over the last year, just with our handling, different states handled the shutdown process is different, and I think that Illinois definitely pushed some residents out by the way it handled the situation. One thing we haven't talked about is our declining population, and is that one of the, we talked about trying to focus on some big issues with these funds and trying to knock some things, really big issues out of the park, as opposed to 100 small requests. Should we going forward try and focus on ways to revitalize? It's right, I mean, it says revitalize, to make our community more appeasing, to try and get people coming in here with these funds? Is there something that we could, just something to think about going forward? Is there a way that we could use a chunk of these funds to draw in businesses, to draw in new residents, because ultimately your economy is what dictates all of these other things that we're talking about, our mental health issues, our drug use issues, our court systems, our crime issues, all of those things are directly tied to the economy. So going forward, I would like to see us thinking about bringing people in, not just trying to manage what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's different schools of thought on that, and I think that the board will tackle all of those conversations. You know, it could be chicken or the egg. You know, sometimes one could lead to the other, or it could be vice versa, or it's a combination of factors. I don't know that everything's so simple, but we will start to work through that. And really, the municipalities that are feeling it the most I'm sure they'll jump at the opportunity to partner with us.
Well, especially like I know the city of Kankakee did a grant program for a while of people, first-time home buyers in Kankakee, where they were given stimulus towards the purchase of a new home. Could we consider something on the county level to try and bring in new businesses with a grant program to incentivize them to come here and invest in our community?
I think that might be what Bradley's doing with their anchor stores. I will say that. You gotta have inventory, expensive inventory, but that's, I think, what they're trying to do. I won't speak for them, but there is something to be said with having seed properties, and we had a revolving loan fund, which turned out to be the belly up fund, I think, I don't know how much of that was ever repaid, but most of it, like I think it was Mr. Snipes who mentioned that those loans typically didn't get repaid, but if they're still here, then it worked, right? So that's the key, is if it works. So I think a lot of these things are tied together, and each of them is not operating in its own silo. So I think if we do what government can do and enable free enterprise to take over, then, you know, I think that might be the best way to go about it. But this board will decide. Mr. Lear, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue of population decline, I would inform this board, if you may not heard, the Economic Alliance has set up a task force, residential growth task force, that the chairman and a couple of board members attended, looking at ways to deal with that. And any ideas that you have that would help that task force focus, and maybe even provide some suggestions to this board, would be much appreciated, because there is a real concern on the part of not only, well, of all the members of that task force, both the elected officials and those representing various private businesses, a real concern about the question of population growth, and some serious efforts are being made to look at ways to reverse that decline.
Mm-hmm. And one group you don't see sitting at the table right now are schools. And I think that is a challenge we have in the area as well. If you look at the ratings of the schools, and that's not to indict any particular one over the other, people look at that when they move into an area. So that we're gonna be going down that road as well, and hopefully engaging the schools in a real positive, you know, bootstraps type discussion on how we address that. And that's coming out of this housing thing as well. But there are partners, they're not the whipping post on this one, you know, so there's a lot to do here. There's a lot of challenges. We can't expect to do everything at once, but I do think that we can do some things very well. I'll just leave it at that. Any other thoughts? Mr. Long?
Last week we heard from the state's attorney and the sheriff about their concerns about domestic violence, and I was just wondering if we've heard from like Harbor House, or maybe Tom Latham is aware of some consortium that's working on that issue at all?
No, I haven't heard of that. Tom, have you heard of anybody that's working on the DV problem?
Outside of grants we have ourselves right now for that.
He said not outside of the grants you currently have?
Outside of the grant we currently have for that.
Okay.
We work with the sheriff and state attorney's office.
I also know that like the shelter, the Harbor House shelter, is always struggling to keep afloat, and it's an intricate part of, you know, trying to address that problem, at least in the emergent part of the problem.
Yeah. It touches a lot of different things.
It does?
That we're talking about. Mental health, substance abuse, all of that.
Yes.
Joblessness.
Yes.
You know, so, but as Mr. Rowe said, it's usually about power. It's not about anything else. Yeah. So, Mr. Kirkstra, did you have something?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Will you allow that, Mr. Hess?
No, I won't. I'll make
Okay.
a motion, we adjourn, he can second.
Heavy-handed government. No, I just, so, and if anybody that's here that's been participating has any questions, please give us a call. You know, oh, by the way, motion to adjourn, there's a second. All those in favor?